Shara from Woodshop Diaries, and today I'm going to show you how I built this contemporary style outdoor dog slash cat house. So if you're ready to get building, let's go. A few years ago, I built my favorite shop dog Lucy an outdoor doghouse. But as things often happen, she quickly became an inside dog and the outside cats ended up taking it over. It's been in pretty rough shape for the last year, and it was really too big for the cats anyway. So I decided to replace it with a slightly smaller house to better fit them and to use this opportunity to play around with a new design. This house would also fit a medium-sized dog and could be easily modified for larger or smaller pets as needed. I'm sharing the building plans on the blog and I will link to them below. And before we get started, I do want to thank my friends at DAP for partnering with me to make this project possible. Now, if you're ready to see how it came together, let's get building. I built the main house body from a single sheet of 3/4 inch plywood and the bottom deck from 2x4s and 1x6s. Now, you can opt for treated lumber for this if you want, but I used untreated and just made sure to caulk and seal everything really well just to protect the wood, so it should last several years. I've provided a plywood cut diagram and the plans linked in the description, but the first thing I did was set my Craig rip cut up for a 24-inch wide cut and rip a piece off the end of the plywood sheet. I'll cut this down to use as the bottom later, but for now I set it to the side and ripped another 24-inch wide strip off the remaining sheet. This piece will be the sides and the top of the house, so I set it aside with the bottom for now. From the remaining plywood, I began to cut down the front and the back sides of the house. I made these 36 inches wide, so I cut two 36-inch long pieces first, then started to draw out the roofline. I wanted this roofline to be off-center to give it just a little bit more of a modern look, so I measured 24 inches from one edge and made a mark, and this will be the roof peak. Then I used my speed square to draw lines 60 degrees off square so that the roof peak is 120 degrees. I used a straight edge to extend these lines and then used my Craig AccuCut and circular saw to cut along them. You could also use a clamp and a straight edge here to make these cuts. Once I had one down, I traced it onto the other to make two identical pieces, one for the front and one for the back. Now I set these to the side and pulled out the 24-inch wide strip that I ripped off the plywood sheet at the beginning. I started with the longer strip first to cut down the sides and the top. Now, most likely, even though you tried to be as accurate and careful as possible, between the measuring and the cutting, your front and back pieces will likely not be exactly what the plans say. The plans that I've shared below are a great guide, but I found it much more accurate to measure each side before cutting. So I started with one side and worked my way around. The side pieces will overlap the bottom, so I measured the side and added 3/4 inch for the plywood bottom. Now for the roof pieces to match up, they need to be beveled 30 degrees. So first I adjusted my circular saw's bevel to 30 degrees. On this side piece, the bottom edge will be square and the top is beveled 30 degrees. So I measured off the square end and set my straight edge up so that the short side of the bevel is the measurement that I got. This piece should fit the side and hang off the bottom about 3/4 inch. I repeated measuring and cutting each side the same way, making sure to bevel the edges the right direction. Now, since I already beveled this plywood edge 30 degrees, I could just flip it over, measure off the short end, and make another 30-degree cut the same way. I test fit each piece after cutting, and when I got to the very last piece, I cut it just like the other side so that the bottom edge was square, the top was beveled 30 degrees, and it overhung the bottom edge by 3/4 inch. And lastly, I cut the bottom edge to fit with square edges. Now all the pieces are cut and it's ready to assemble. However, since I was painting these pieces two different colors, I went ahead and finished them first. Now, because I was using some lower quality plywood, there were some voids to cover on the edges. Now, to help better seal this wood and smooth out these edges, I used some DAP Platinum Patch for exterior use on the plywood edges and in any knots or voids in the wood. I applied it onto all the plywood edges on the outside pieces and let it dry. While it dried, I cut out the opening on the front piece for the cats to go inside. Now, you can make this door any size that you want or need, but I used a scrap piece of plywood to just trace out an opening that I thought was a good size. It ended up being about 11 inches tall and 14 inches wide. I just cut this out with a jigsaw. There was some tear out here that I could have avoided if I had remembered to cut this out so that the piece was flipped upside down, but I'll be covering it up later with trim, so it wasn't really a huge deal. After the putty was dry on the edges, I sanded it smooth and began priming and painting the outside pieces black and the front and back pieces white. I gave them each several coats, and once they were dry, I could finally screw them together. I started by attaching the back panel to the bottom panel using wood screws so that the back was inset about 1 3/4 inch. Then I did the same with the front panel. Now, this 1 3/4 inch measurement is totally optional. You can make it smaller or bigger, or just install these so that they're completely flush to the outside. However you wanted. The 1 3/4 just kind of looked good to me, so that's what I used. Once the back and front panels were attached to the bottom, I just wrapped the sides and top panels around them and screwed them in place. I used some exterior grade wood glue at all of the angled joints and made sure that the front and back panels stayed an 1 3/4 inch inset from the edges. Sorry about the blurriness in these shots. I set my camera to manually focus on the last clip and forgot to switch it back to auto. There we go, that's better. The pieces fit together really well, and the glue should hold the seams pretty tight, but to cover and seal off any gaps and also just to smooth things out a little bit better, I used some more DAP Platinum Patch to cover the screw heads and the seams. And then to seal off and help waterproof the rest of the house, I used DAP Extreme Stretch Caulk to fill in all the joints around the front and the back panel. This should just help seal everything off from rain and wind and just help waterproof the house. After the caulk dried and I gave the house a final sanding, I touched up the paint and began working on the deck. Now, the deck is a totally optional step. I added it on my old doghouse and the cats really liked it, so I just added it again here. To build it, I used 2x4s for the frame and 1x6s for the decking. I cut down my 2x4 pieces to build a frame 48 inches wide by 44 inches deep. Then I cut my 1x6x8 boards in half into 8 48-inch long pieces. Before assembling, I stained everything with an exterior stain and sealant so that I could just cover all of the wood edges for better protection. Then I assembled the frame using 2.5-inch wood screws, making sure to pre-drill all of my holes first because the 2x4s will tend to split pretty easily. And once the frame was together, I started to screw in the decking. This was the easy part. Once the deck was complete, I set the house on the back corner and used a few screws to screw it in. This was a really tight squeeze, so it might have been better to flip it on its back and screw it in from the bottom side. And all that's left now is the trim and decorative details. I cut some scrap 1x2s to fit around the door opening, stain them, and nailed them in place. I had intentions on adding an awning here above the door, but I didn't really have scraps long enough for what I had planned to do, and so I just decided against it. However, you can get as creative as you want with adding decorative details, awnings, covered porches, whatever you feel like doing. Lastly, just to add a little pop of color to this black and white house, I attached a flower pot hanger and added a little flower. And then I called it finished. I'm really happy with the result here and excited to trash the old doghouse and give the cats a fresh new hangout. Also, I think that they'll really appreciate this modern design. So I hope you've enjoyed this project, and if you'd like to build one for yourself, be sure to check out the plans linked below, along with links to all of the products used in this video. And if you enjoyed the project and can't wait to see more, be sure to subscribe so you stay up to date on all of the latest builds. Thanks so much for watching, friends, and until next time, happy building!